It's very exciting to have you here today, and I think we're covering a topic that doesn't often get covered, which is children's and YA LGBTQ literature. And obviously a topic that's really important right now, as is being debated in schools, and their parents pulling kids out of school because, God forbid, they heard the LGBT thing, which seems really counterintuitive in this day and age. So we'll talk a bit about that. And first, I would like to introduce you and have you share with us a little bit about your book and read from it, and then we'll have a chat. So we'll start here with Kelly Briggs, and the name of your book is Edwin's First Pet.
Yes.
Over to you.
Okay, so, do you want some reading?
What did you write about? What is Edwin's First Pet about?
Okay, so, it's about a little boy that's in a same-sex family. It's not directed straight at the point of, I've got two mums. It's just a normal children's story using something that happens in most children's lives, getting a new pet. So that's the focus, but then obviously he's having the discussions where his parents are giving him, saying that you can't do this because you need responsibility, you're not old enough, and pets take a lot of looking after. And the reason I did it this way is because there is not a lot of same-sex family books, especially in schools, but also I didn't want to make that the main point. I wanted it just to be a children's storybook, so a child can just sit and read it and be like, oh, that little boy's got two mummies, rather than a mummy and a daddy or whatever. So that's the way that I wanted to approach it.
Excellent. Fantastic. Do you want to read us a little bit?
Yes.
Then show us.
Okay, I'll try to be teacher. Okay, so one morning, whilst tucking into his favourite breakfast of worms and beetroot juice, Edward was thinking about the question his mummy Cordelia had asked the night before. Have you thought of what you would like for your birthday yet? Mummy Cordelia asked as she walked into the room. Yes, replied Edwin, I would like a puppy. A puppy, Mummy Cordelia replied. Pets are a lot of responsibility, Edwin. They need feeding, walking, and a lot of looking after, Mummy Cordelia explained. I know, but I really want one, Edwin whined with a mouthful of the worms. I will talk to Mummy Drusilla and see what she says. Mummy Cordelia said, clean up the mess around Edwin's mouth. Edwin got down from the table, put on his cloak, grabbed his bag and headed out of the door for school. All day at school, Edwin could not stop thinking about having his own pet puppy and all of the fun they could have together. Bath times, play times, tricks they could play on his sister Luna, it would be fantastic. The next day, Edwin woke up to be surrounded by both of his mummies and his sister Luna. Happy birthday, Edwin, they all shrieked. Rubbing his eyes, Edwin sat up in his bed. Mummy Drusilla handed him a large present. Smiling from ear to ear, Edwin began opening the gift. A puppy, it's a puppy, Edwin shouted at the top of his lungs. There, inside the box, was a small, scruffy-looking puppy smiling up at him. I will name him Fang, Edward announced. He took Fang under his arm, raced out of his room, down the stairs and out into the garden. He picked up one of his toys and threw it.
Fantastic. And Troy, welcome.
Thank you.
So you've also written picture books.
I have, yeah.
And the name of your first one is The Best Mummy Snails in the Whole Wide World.
Absolutely.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Do you want to tell us about it?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a head teacher by trade, and I write and tell stories with the children all the time. So my first book, Best Mummy Snails in the Whole Wide World, was actually written because a parent had approached me and said that her child had been picked on for having two mums. And we just introduced pet snails into the school at the time, and everybody loves pets, don't they? So I decided to write the story about snails because it gets around that awkward issue of sex, because actually the book is more about relationships. And so I did that a couple of years ago. My second book, which is also a mollusk-themed book.
You like mollusks?
I love mollusks, yeah. So this one is The Most Contented Snail. And this is where the baby snails go off to snail school. They meet a friend called Cyril the slug. And I can read a little bit about Cyril the slug.
Absolutely, wonderful.
So this is at the point where we've introduced the two baby snails.
So this is from the second book?
This is the second book.
Excellent.
So here are the two baby snails, and this is Frank and Carl, and they go off to snail school. While they both happily played together, they also welcomed others into their games. One such friend was Cyril the Slug. Cyril was a happy-go-lucky little slug who liked to do well at school. He had a wonderful smile and enjoyed playing with Frank and Carl. But behind that smile lay a niggling feeling. I wonder what the feeling is going to be. Whenever Frank and Carl played hide and seek, they had their beautiful shells to tuck away into. Whenever they played ball, they could bounce it from one shell to another. Whenever they played shell tag, they slithered after one another trying to win the game. And all Cyril could do was look on. One day, Cyril, looking downhearted, saw his two friends playing a game with their striking shells. Instead of going to try and join in, he merely sat on the side and looked on. Out of the corner of his eye, Frank spotted Cyril glumly sitting by himself. He went over to ask what was wrong. Without thinking, Cyril sobbed that he wanted a shell. All he'd ever wanted was a shell. He longed to play with the games his friends played, and he wished that he was just like them. Frank and Carl pondered for a while. How could they help their friend? Carl, the problem solver, hatched a plan. And the story goes on to explore how they go and help Cyril the Slug feel like he's the most contented snail in the whole wide world.
Excellent, fantastic, thank you, Troy. And welcome, Anne.
Thank you.
Now, Anne, yours isn't particularly YA, but it deals with a lot of issues of youth. So you are joining us from kind of a different perspective, which is fantastic. And your book is Sugar and Snails. Wonderful. Do you want to tell us about it? It just runs right along, does it? From pets to snails to snails.
Yeah. So this is Sugar and Snails, which is a midlife coming-of-age story about a woman who kept her past identity a secret for 30 years. She made a life-changing decision at the age of 15, and now, after all this time, she's going to have to make another one. But it's pretty tough because she feels that life won't be worth living if her secret gets out. So it's a novel for adults, although some young people have read it, but it looks back. It's set in the year 2004. It also looks back to her childhood and quite painful adolescence in the 60s and 70s. I can read a bit actually to link with the others about starting school, what she remembers from that and the difficulties there. Okay. Back in the 60s, with little traffic to threaten us and enough older ones to keep an eye on the tots, we'd make the street our playground from the moment we munched our cornflakes till it was time to brush our teeth for bed. As soon as we could walk unaided, we were absorbed into the local gang, running and jumping, hopping and skipping, laughing and screaming between the chip shop at the top of the street and the dairy at the bottom. Our mothers would put us out the door in the mornings like they might put out the cat at night, depositing us on the doorstep and directing us towards the rabble within, if need be, a tap on the behind. The tarmac would become a racecourse, cricket pitch or battlefield. Courts became hurdles, goalposts, tanks. The pavement a chalky art gallery, hopscotch grid or both. We swarmed from one end of the street to the other, flowing like water from one gate to the next. Apart from the leaders, giants of 10 and 11, who were almost grown-ups as far as the little ones were concerned, we had no need to distinguish one child from another when we moved with the herd. Dark or fair, fat or thin, boy or girl, greyed out in a blissful merger of body and soul. It was only at school, assigned a specific seat and expected to stick with it hour after hour, day after day, that the differences between us began to matter. School imposed distinctions, a sham personalisation, designed, it seemed, to cut off other options and keep us in our place. "This is your classroom," said a beaming Miss Bamford, but when I thought I might like to sample the classroom down the corridor where my sister's paintings adorned the walls, I was hauled back and made to stand in the corner. This is your chair. But when I wanted to sit on a seat that was bathed in light from the high window, I was slapped on both hands with a ruler. This is your coat pick, with a lovely picture of a panda above it. And lovely it was, but so were the sailing boat, the gingerbread man, the scarecrow, and the 30 other images arranged around the cloakroom, each one out of bounds. I could hardly contain my disappointment. So many times I'd stood with my mother, my hands clutching the bars of the rusting gate, gazing across the yard at the slate grey schoolhouse, longing for the day I could take my place inside. Twin stone staircases led to a heavy wooden door, the numbers 1873 embossed above it, as grand as the entrance to a castle. At school, I'd learned to read and never have to go without a story. I'd glide up those steps like a fairy tale princess, entering one day by the left side, the next by the right. All my hopes that school would widen my horizons caved in on me. I didn't understand that the letters above the stairs spelt out boys on one side and girls on the other. That my mother would laugh, then plead, then slap me hard on the legs and carry me up like a sack of coal when I tried to go up the wrong one. Thank you.
Thank you. That was lovely. So, quite different, and yet dealing with similar themes, I think, with childhood and belonging, and the difference that kids feel, and not understanding why. So, here's my first very vague question for you. Do you remember the very first book you found that had LGBT people in it? And how did that make you feel? Just to throw a question at you that I did not give you before this.
The first LGBT book that I found was actually Antango Makes Three.
Okay.
And the sad thing is, that's actually a very recent publication. It's only about 10 or 11 years old. And I only discovered that through a friend of a friend about 5 years ago now.
Wow. Really recent.
Yeah, very.
So not much help when you're 10.
No. In terms of children's books,
Yeah.
there are other adults' books, but I think that one stands out because, and it's a brilliant story. But such a shame that I'm now 42,
Yeah.
and I'd only just discovered that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And did you?
I can't, certainly not as a child. And I can't think really as an adult because I'm quite a lot older. I mean, there would have been books around really, but
I don't know if there would have though.
There was, but they were kind of discreet, weren't they?
Not aimed toward kids.
No, not for kids.
I've
No,
not
not
seen
for
it,
kids.
no.
Not for kids.
And I think that's where the new kind of transition is coming in, isn't it? Where The Well of Loneliness was the first one I read, which is dire and so sad and very much kill your gaze, which we're trying to get away with, get away from now. But children's books or young people, I certainly didn't see.
No, I didn't have any. No, I didn't. Again, same as you, it's in my adult life that I read my first book, and that was very recent. That was in the last 8 years. But children's books, not at all. Or teenage books.
Yeah. Which leads to the next question then. Why is it important that we get this done? That we start having more YA fiction, more even younger children's fiction that include LGBT themes?
Because they need something to relate to. There's kids and teenagers, obviously, that are gay, and they feel, some people are very lucky that they do have a supporting family, supporting teachers and friends, but some people aren't that lucky, and I think it's really sad that they don't have an outlet, or they don't have anything to relate to. For a teenager as well, in your head, you're thinking that you're on your own and there's obviously something wrong with you. But I think if there was more information there and more things to relate to, they'd be like, well, that explains it, or anything else, especially with young children as well. And I don't even mean children that are necessarily gay themselves or anything like that, but me having children myself, it'd be nice for their friends to have access to books, so when their friends come out for tea, it's not, wow, you've got 2 mums, it's, okay, cool. It's more acceptable, which is how it should be anyway, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Joy?
And I think building on that, actually, it's about normalising
Yeah.
same-sex relationships, just like you would normalise a family that is perhaps of mixed race,
Yeah.
or a family that is adoptive, or there are many different families out there, and it's actually it's our job as educators to broaden people's horizons and make people feel that they are valued and they're respected regardless of what their background is. It's interesting because 2 years ago I worked with my union, the NHT, and Stonewall, and we put together some guidance to support teachers, particularly school leaders, particularly in terms of supporting LGBT staff. And I think children need role models. Children need to be able to look up to people and think, oh, it's okay to be gay. And I think schools are the last bastion of the staunch, and I think this comes particularly from the Section 28 legislation many years ago, which basically meant that teachers were scared of teaching about same-sex relationships. And I think it's only now that we feel a bit more empowered to be able to actually come out and talk about these things with children.
Absolutely. And obviously yours looks back on a kind of a tortured youth. How does that kind of relate to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of hoping that it isn't as bad for children these days, but obviously I share anxieties about are we going to go backwards. So this is a kind of, I don't know, maybe like a cautionary tale of don't do it so terribly as it happened for my character here. But also, I mean, on the whole issue of what we teach children about all kinds of diversity, I think it's just so important. And my background is in psychology, and I keep harping on this little small bit of research, and it is a small area, which actually is showing that diversity is good for our brains in general, so that the more that we're exposed to it, whatever our sexuality or whatever, it's good for us, it's healthy, and particularly if it's done in positive. We've got ways of interacting with people positively. And of course, reading does that at any age, really. So for those of us of my generation who have missed out on it in our youth, but it sounds like you have as well. There's a chance to catch up as well with a lot of books that are on all kinds of diverse issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And with regard to teaching in the schools, what would you like to see happen as far as kind of socializing, normalizing, and getting the word out? How would you like to see that happen?
My goal, I want to get my book into schools because, you see, like I said, I've got two children myself. They bring books home, and the variation that they've got mixed race families, like you say, they've got different religious families. They learn about so many different diversities in the world. I don't understand what the problem is with this one. I don't understand it at all, and I think because of what went off with when you were younger and your generation, I think we've learned that it's not helping anything by having people's views so narrow-minded. Give them their own way and show them that make your own mind up. It's fine, you're going to be okay. And then it's just, like I say, it's not just aiming at people that are saying, oh, I think I'm gay or there's something wrong with me. It's for people that aren't gay. It's to help them help other friends and socialise and things like that as well. And I just think it just should be made more normal because there's no issue. So I think it'd be quite nice for a child to bring home his book. Oh, this week, mummy, I'm reading this, and that's it. It's not a big deal. I don't want everyone to think that it's a massive issue. We haven't got to put a big thing on it. just let them do it. And it's, do you know what I mean? I think that it needs to be more open.
And you think starting at school age
Yes.
is important?
Yeah, because that's the bonding time with your parent. You bring a book home, you have reading time, we fill in the reading diary. That is special. So if that child at 5, 6, 7 years old has questions, you can answer them, and then that child is going to grow up a better person because they've already been informed. They haven't got to go into the world where some people don't have that opinion and they've got a negative opinion. They should be strong enough then with the information that they've had for the prior years to stand up and say, well, actually, I don't agree with you. I don't think there's an issue.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, actually, because so my philosophy is I use a lot of picture books in all of my teaching, because actually a picture book is there to be shared, and so my books are actually aimed at 5 to 9 broadly, 6 to 9 years old, but I've actually shared it with children as old as 11, 12, actually more as a discussion point, because when I've shared these stories in assemblies, and I've gone into a number of different schools now to actually share the story, to talk about the impact of actually relationships, it's the feedback that I've had has been very positive. One boy who was in year 6, I basically read the story to the children and I said, put your hand up if you can tell me what you think the moral of the story is. And a year 6 boy put his hand up and he basically said, well, that's easy, love is love. And that really blew me away because it was quite profound, actually. I use that as my hashtag now when I'm tweeting and doing all sorts of things with the book, because actually for me that is the powerful message that we're getting across to the children. And it's actually I think the reason that some groups, and I don't necessarily think it's necessarily a religious group as such, because there are a lot of LGBT Muslims out there that actually don't have a problem with it, and there are a lot of other Muslims that are out there that don't have a problem with it as well. Likewise, there are a lot of Christian and Jewish groups who have got a problem with it. So I don't necessarily think it's one particular group. I think actually the issue that they've got is that they're seeing the sex side of things as opposed to the religion, the relationship side of things. And actually, we're not talking about the sex part of stories with the children.
Yeah, that'd be awkward.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, that's the whole reason why I chose snails in the first place, because
Right.
actually they lay eggs. So, but the point behind it is you actually want the children to go away and realise that actually there are lots of different relationships in this world. Just like you can have a brother-sister relationship, you can have an auntie-uncle relationship. There are lots of different families, and as long as you've got a strong bond with somebody, then you can make that attachment, and then you can hopefully grow up in quite a well-rounded way. So it's actually getting that representation across.
So kind of like Kelly's saying, starting it very early
Yeah.
and getting that just normalization done.
Yeah.
Because of course your poor character doesn't get that. And it quite drastically affects your character by having that bubble of non-self-acceptance.
It's also, I mean, an issue for parents as well, that, you know, that not all parents are actually able to manage parenting very well, in fact, you know, but I suppose moving beyond the LGBT area into just sort of anything about, you know, your point about love, and that should be starting for these children long before they're at school. And again, that's something that's kind of breaking down in society with the lack of investment in preschool care, Sure Start that we had, which is just the one decent thing that Tony Blair's government did. It was breaking down, and so yeah, I mean, just get that message of love and modelling how to love as well, because some people don't know how to do it, and people suffer. And I suppose for this, in my novel, the parents were quite scared about having this child that that wouldn't fit in, and they wanted to help but weren't quite sure how to, and the ways that they did it actually messed things up, or they kind of muddled through as best they could, but it wasn't so good.
Which I think was quite generational in a way
Oh,
as well.
absolutely.
There's no booklet with parenting, is there?
No.
So, dealing with kids who are different or perceived different can be very difficult. Certainly, I didn't see any books like that when I was a kid. I had a gay parent, and in the 70s, that was really unusual. I think it's fabulous that you're able to do these books with your kids now and give them an entirely different experience than your character had, than I had. I think it's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is the most difficult part about writing youth and YA LGBT?
I would say it's actually getting it recognised. It's a hard market to get into, full stop. So I've written to a number of different people trying to get my story out there. I've actually self-published in the end because I didn't want to lose the creative control of the book, and actually I didn't want to sit around twiddling my thumbs waiting for somebody to eventually say, oh yes, I like this story, I believe in the story, so I'm getting it out there.
Yes.
So if there are any publishers out there that want to take it on, great, because it's very hard work doing it this way.
If you're watching right now.
So, but at the same time, I appreciate this. It is a very challenging market out there. However, research does state that people are now coming back to the humble book as opposed to using Kindle and other electronic reader variations. So hopefully there's a bit of hope out there.
And you're actually you're currently going to schools, aren't you?
I do, yeah. So
running a project.
So I work in a school, and I'm in school full time. However, what I do during my school holidays, because the county that I work in has completely different holidays to every other county around here, and so I tend to go and visit different schools in different counties. And I've done various book signings before. I will lead workshops, I do assemblies with children, and I share the story. And I think it's important to get out there and do that. But in my own school, I've been working as part of the pilot of the No Outsiders project, which was originally started in Birmingham by Andrew Moffat. And basically it's a collection of 35 different picture books that some of them have got LGBT links. There's I think 4 LGBT storylines, but the rest of them have got stories of normalising disability, normalising different religions, different family makeups, and so and we've introduced that right from our reception class up. So every child in the whole school takes part in these story times, and we do a particular talk and a particular lesson about the books. So in reception class, so that's 4 and 5 year olds, we have it's just a small hardback picture book called Mommy, Mama and Me. And it literally just talks about this is my mum, and this is what I do with my mum, this is my mama, this is what I do with my mama, and it just kind of introduces that the fact that this child has got 2 mums. I mentioned Antango Mix 3 earlier. That book is actually used in Year 5, and that was actually filmed by the BBC recently. Because they wanted to see how we actually used the picture books in our school. And that is basically the story of, it's a true story about the gay penguins in New York Zoo. And the zookeeper basically recognises that these penguins have got a relationship, that they're wanting to look after an egg. So the zookeeper gives them an egg, and they bring up and hatch this egg, and they bring up a baby penguin called Tango. It's very sweet.
Because everybody likes pets.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that I think is quite a key thing. If you have something that people can relate to,
Yeah.
then you're going to get the buy-in.
Yeah.
And actually with picture books, it's great because you can share. As a parent, you can share. And in that way, you're actually educating the parents as well as educating the children.
Which kind of goes back to what you were saying, Kelly, about bringing the book home
Yeah.
and parents simply sitting down to read it with their kids, and that just being an aspect of the book.
I think by doing that as well, the scope for it, how big it could be from that, changing that one little thing. You think you've got that book in your house, you don't have reading time with your son or daughter. I don't know, one night you go out, you've got a babysitter. That babysitter's going to sit with that child. What if that babysitter's having problems and they're reading it and think, do you know what? They clearly are accepting it, and they think it's fine. Maybe I could talk to them. It opens so many avenues without you even trying.
So butterfly effect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but in such a positive way. And I think I think for the next generation, it's just going to help so much, because there's so much hate and things going off nowadays, and everything's so negative in the world, and there's so much bad things going on. I think if we try and educate the children that we've got now, I'm hoping they'll grow up more informed, more accepting, and without sounding cliche, I think the world will be a nicer place.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I don't think the world being a nicer place is ever going to be a cliche, unfortunately. Yeah. Excellent. And do you worry about kind of getting flack for what you do? And you've got, this is your third? Oh, this was your first, but
My
you've got
first,
two
yeah,
more, right?
yeah. I've got another novel and a short story collection.
And are they kind of LGBT as well?
No. I mean, in my second novel, there's it's about a heterosexual relationship, but the woman's best friend is gay, and the man has the usual. Well, no, sorry, not the usual, but the prejudices that some men have. But I think it's kind of it's about something. It's about a man who seeks to resolve the relationship problem by keeping a woman captive in a cellar. So it's a kind of, that's the story. But this kind of side issue is I think it shows his prejudice is about his emptiness rather than based on any rationale. Well, as it
Kind of a standard homophobia.
Yeah, but it's kind of like he's this weird character, so that and I'm quite interested as a writer of putting in what I call isms, so the homophobia and all kinds of prejudice characters, to explore that, because this is it's the negative side of what we're talking about, but this is an aspect of society as well, but about how that's dealt with. But I always worry when I do that, whether people might think that those are my prejudices, but because there's some bits, particularly in my short story collection, about racism and things like that I hope.
Tougher subjects.
Yeah, I like tough subjects.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the LGBT sector has its share of tough subjects to deal with. As we mentioned earlier, Amy Dunn, who couldn't be here today, has written self-harm, and I think you touch on self-harm as well.
Yeah, I mean, my novel, the novel, it starts in the contemporary stream in the 2004, and it actually starts with quite a graphic description of self-harm, which is cutting her arm, which was something that she'd done quite a bit as a child, and then there's the crisis that provokes the eventual change and redemption at the end of the novel. Her response to that is self-harm, and again, unfortunate, which is another very common issue.
It is, and to see it in LGBT fiction for young people, I think is really important.
Yeah.
To touch on those dark subjects that the kids will have to deal with at some point.
That's interesting, because the NHT guidance that I helped write with Stonewall looks at a lot of research that basically states that LGBT people are much more likely to self-harm and much more likely to have depression or try and take their own life than non-LGBT people. And I think that is partially because it's been so suppressed and so people don't know how to deal with it. And I think touching on what you were saying about any phobias are based on fear, and I think they are. I think a lot of any kind of homophobia is based on a fear or a non-understanding of the subject, and because somebody is then so frightened of it, they push it away, because it's easier to push something away than to start to look into it and start to feel a bit easier about it by finding out more.
And books like yours make you look. Do you think it'd be too early? What age would you say you start kind of introducing me with the slightly darker subjects to kids? I mean, you have two at home that are fairly young.
13 and 11 now. Yeah.
So this is kind of the time, isn't it, when they can start looking at dark issues?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really difficult thing, because obviously you don't want your child reading about things like that, but also you need to make sure that there's nothing going on, so that then you can help them if there's anything giving them sort of thoughts. And it is, from a mum's point of view, it is difficult, and I wouldn't like my youngest one reading about self-harm, because I just wouldn't want him, because again, for as long as I possibly can, I want them to think and feel very happy and very safe, because once they're out in the world, that's it. And I think, as I've said already, I think the world's full of so much ugliness anyway, and you're a child this much of your life and an adult this much. I just want them to hold on to something beautiful for a little bit longer. But I think now with my eldest, he's 13, he's going to be going through changes, it's going to be hormones and things like that. He needs something that's relatable, and if he's having problems, he needs to be able to read about it and think, okay, I need to talk to somebody or anything else. So yeah, I think it's important.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Not yet. Okay.
Do you actually, do you feel a sort of pull as LGBT writers to present only a more positive side of the experience or a negative? And do you think you're going to get criticism either way? If you're only focusing on the positives, you're not showing the negatives, and if you're showing the negatives, you're not showing the positives?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I think so. I think the reason that I went down the route of doing mine is because I did some research and I couldn't find in England any LGBT books in school for Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2 at all. And my children were bringing books home that were so varied. In fact, one book they brought home, it was from a very, very popular book collection that I read when I was at school. And they brought it home, and I loved it as a kid. And they brought this one book home, and it was about terrorism, and it was extremely detailed. And I hit the roof. I was like, I don't understand how you can sit and tell kids that this is what's going on when I think he was 7 when he brought it home. But you can't tell him that he can have 2 mums. It's just insane. So I think the way that I did mine, I did my research, and there wasn't any books in schools. And the only books that I could find children-wise were in America. And they were called things like, this is Oliver and he has 2 dads, or this is Mary and she's got 2 mums, or whatever. I wanted to...
Quite specific.
Yeah, I don't want to say, I'm gay, here's my book. Read about it, it's mint. I want it to be like, here's a children's book, and, oh look, he's got 2 mums. It's not about the fact that he's in a same-sex family. It's about the fact he's a child, and then you find out he's got 2 mums. And I don't want it to be that that's the biggest deal. I just want them to think, because then I think sometimes if you spotlight it, you're adding to the fact that you're making that a big deal. Because it isn't. It just needs to be normalised, and it's like, yeah, okay then, your mum's gay, it's fine. You're not going to melt.
But you want to keep that positive message.
Yes.
As far as
Yeah.
keeping the dark stuff out for a while.
Yeah, in the books that I'm doing.
Okay.
But I do think that the message just needs to be delivered at different sections, in different age books as well. I think it does.
Excellent. And of course, as a teacher, I'm sure you...
Yeah, I think books need to be age appropriate, and actually as a child generally everything is all lovely and rosy, and you want to keep that childhood special for as long as you possibly can. There are some books that you can use. We've got one basically that talks about having a chimp, and actually you've got a chimp inside, and that chimp it can be very angry, it can do things that are not very nice, it can I always ban the word nice, it encourages you to do naughty things, and actually that is a way of encouraging children to think about what they've done in terms of potential actions in a different way, but in a positive way, and it's kind of handling it in a positive way without it being too in your face. And I think there are subtleties that you can use in books to try and get those messages across, but certainly for primary school children, you want to try and make it as positive as possible, because you want the children to feel positive about life, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
For me, it's a bit different, because I don't actually identify as LGBT, so I'm not an LGBT author, and therefore I'm quite anxious about presenting the negative side, as there is quite a bit of in my books, along with positives, because like, well, what's it to do with me? What do I know? What am I doing, sort of interfering in this area? So it's an area that does cause me some anxiety, and so I was very relieved when it was shortlisted for the Polari First Book Prize, and that it was endorsed by the actor Rebecca Root and a few other people who've been through sort of similar experiences as my character have responded positively to it. But it was quite a risk, actually, as I look back, putting this forward. It was a story I wanted to tell, but I did ask myself whether I had a right to tell it. But and things have actually changed so much in the 4 years since it was published. So it was published in 2015. And when I started writing it in 2008, the narratives that I saw about this issue, as I'll call it, were kind of, they weren't very nuanced as far as I could see the ones that were out available to the general public. So I wanted to write something which would be a bit more exploring, not a black and white story, I guess. But, so that's what I did. I took that risk, and I think it paid off.
And I think that kind of brings us back to where we began, was talking about how times have changed.
Mm-hmm.
And how different times are. I mean, I could have been taken away from my mum when I was little, if anybody found out that she was gay. And now you're writing books and taking them to schools.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that difference is really quite stunning when you look at it as a generational thing, that we've taken some massive leaps forward in that way. So, talking about that in the scheme of things, what would you like to see be the next stage? Lots of these books, or not needing them? What would you think would be the next stage in children's and YA?
I think actually the next stage will be to see it as, I'd like to see every school with some of these books in. And I don't mean hundreds of them, but I think every school should have a representation, just as every school has now got a representation of books with black characters in, or religious elements. I think every school should have some books in there. That's what I would like to see. That's why I joined the No Outsiders pilot in Leicestershire in the first place, because I think it's important that we actually have that across every school, because schools are going to get the children that are going to get the adults that are going to then start to breed more acceptance across the whole population.
Like Kelly was saying, the butterfly effect.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I
what would
agree.
you like to see as the next stage?
The same, really. I don't think you need, like the school I before, of all of these sorts of books, but I think definitely more than one. So it's not like this is the gay book, your child needs to read it. I don't think you need that, but I think just a mixture. I mean, there's so many books in schools and they touch on so many different stories. There's so many different collections as well. Like I say, when I was at school, I was reading all the Biff and Chip books and things like that. There's so many different stories that it touches upon with all the diversities. Just a few in there, I think it'd be nice, just put them in there. I don't think it needs to be this is the section for that and that's the section for that. They just need to go in, this is a child's storybook, that's all it is.
Right.
And I think it just needs to be available to everybody. And I think that's what would be nice in most of the schools in the UK, and I think that's what we need to do.
That's interesting, Kelly, because I think there's been a lot of debate as to whether we still need the LGBT section on a bookshelf in a bookstore. And of course, many bookstores have done away with them and mixed the books in. But the argument is then, but if you want an LGBT book, you no longer know where to look for one because they've been mixed in. So, but with kids, obviously kids just want books.
Yeah.
So how do you balance that then with having kids who maybe need these types of books and helping them find them?
I don't know. I mean, I think with children's books anyway, I think it should just be all mixed in. But I think with any school library or public library anyway, I think there is a sort of system where you can find, I want a book on this, this and this. It auto-populates anyway. So there is a way, if you want to go in and say, I want this book, there is a way to get it. I mean, I've been in libraries before, I want it to have this, this and this. It's not in the section where I'm finding it, and the librarian can take you straight through to it. But obviously with older children, you're not necessarily going to want to talk to your librarian and say, I need a book about gay people, because that is part of the issue. They don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But I think with a lot of schools and universities of kids that age anyway, they have their own library system on the computers, so they can find it and sort it themselves anyway. I think that probably would help as well anyway with them, because they don't want to be shouting about it. They just need that information. So I think there is a system really anyway. But I don't think you need a dusty shelf in the back corner saying this is the section for gay people.
Right.
And there's a lot of organisations out there that actually have now found various LGBT books anyway. So, I mean, Educate and Celebrate, Out in Education, they're just two that do have a list. Stonewall have got a list of books. They instantly don't have mine on there yet. And they do need to kind of regularly update, because there are a lot of books that have come on the market recently. And I think it's good to have that broad range. But actually schools can go and access, I think schools need to be proactive about doing that. They need to go out there and get a collection of different books. But I don't think they should have them segregated in the rainbow corner. I think you've got to have them interspersed with all the other books, so that it is normalised and children will go.
You can't
and
normalise
pick
it
book
if
up.
it's separated, can you? So it's defeating the object.
Excellent. And I mean, that kind of goes to your book, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, and I mean, one of the things about my book is, and one of the ways that makes it a bit more difficult to sell is that it doesn't actually describe why it's an LGBT book, and but that's been part of the mystery. It's read as a mystery, so that this woman has a secret, and the people read it and find out what that secret was, and then it's, oh gosh, yes, well, we're on her side now. And I think a lot of people have read it and come to sort of like an understanding of issues that they maybe wouldn't have thought about. So that's definitely, it sits in the mainstream. But it also it misses out, I think, as well on being picked up, because it is, so in a way, I don't know if I'm sort of contradicting myself, but I'm almost thinking that does need it to be on the rainbow shelf, so that it will be noticed. But yeah, it's difficult. But I mean, when you're saying about the classification, that's another thing that actually has changed in my lifetime. It's that because of the internet, and that there isn't, something doesn't just have to be in one category. It can be in multiple categories at the same time, and it's just so much more easy to pick out on a digital system than it is on concrete shelves. So, yeah, what a great world.
And on that note, we will close. What a great world. Thank you very much to our wonderful panelists and your wonderful books. Hold your books up. Yay for books. Thank you for being here today. And if you're interested in these books, please do have a look and look them up and tell people about them so that we can get these into schools and out into the world where kids can read them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.